My mom and dad were my 24F and my brother's sexual abusers. They started things when we were quite young, and God did they do a good job in grooming us and making us believe it was just normal stuff for some families to do. I grew up believing something was normal. That absolutely wasn't. And the hardest part? I didn't just accept it. For a long time, I felt okay with it. That's the part that still messes with my head. I'm 24 now, but this started when I was a kid, around 7 years old. My brother was just a year older than me. At that age, you don't question your parents. You don't analyze behavior. You don't think, is this right or wrong? You just trust. And that's exactly what they relied on. It began subtly. Nothing that would immediately raise alarms to a child. My parents slowly started normalizing things that, looking back, were clear boundaries being erased. Over time, those harmless moments turned into patterns. Patterns turned into routines. And routines turned into something much deeper and more confusing. We were taught, directly and indirectly, that this was just how some families functioned. That this was a form of closeness, of trust, of love. And when you hear something like that over and over again as a child, it becomes your reality. You don't question it. You internalize it. Looking back now, I can clearly see what it was: grooming. Careful, intentional conditioning. But back then, it just felt like life. As things escalated, the lines became even more blurred. What should have been uncomfortable started to feel familiar. And that's where the confusion really began. Because at some point, I wasn't just going along with it anymore. I started responding to it. That's the part that's hardest to admit. I didn't have the knowledge or maturity to understand what was happening psychologically. I didn't know how the brain can adapt, how it can associate attention with approval, or how repeated exposure can distort your sense of normal. I just knew that this was my family, and this was my... If you met us back then, you would never suspect anything. That's the scary part. Because situations like this don't always look broken from the outside. Sometimes they look perfect. There was one person I confided in, a girl from church. She shared something personal about her own life, and it opened the door for me to say a little bit about mine. But even then, I held back. I hinted at things. I softened the truth. Deep down, I think she understood more than I said out loud. We became close after that. Maybe because, in some way, we both carried things we couldn't fully explain. Years passed, and as I grew older, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was slow, uncomfortable, confusing. I began to realize this wasn't how other families lived. This wasn't something people talked about. This wasn't normal. And once that realization started creeping in, everything changed. The same experiences that once felt familiar started to feel heavy. Wrong. Hard to process. But by then, so much of it was already deeply ingrained. That's what people don't always understand about situations like this. It's not just about what happened. It's about how it rewires your thinking, your boundaries, your sense of self, even your understanding of relationships. By the time I was in my late teens, I was dealing with feelings I couldn't explain. Confusion, guilt, attachment, resentment, all mixed together. I didn't know how to separate what I had been taught from what I was really seeing them. And it hit me all at once. What I had lived through wasn't just unusual. It was wrong. Deeply wrong. And suddenly, all the confusion I had pushed down came rushing to the surface. I had to face the reality of my childhood, the reality of my parents' role in shaping it, and the reality of how it affected me and my brother. That's when the real struggle began. Not the experiences themselves, but understanding them, processing them, and figuring out who I was outside of all of it. Even now, at 24, I'm still working through it. There are days when I feel strong, like I've made progress. And there are days when the memories feel heavy again. But one thing I've come to understand is this. Children don't create these situations. They adapt to them. They survive them. And sometimes, survival looks like acceptance, even participation. But that doesn't mean it was ever their fault. It just means they were trying to make sense of a world they didn't choose. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's how powerful influence can be, especially when it comes from the people you're supposed to trust the most. And how important it is to speak, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's messy, even when you're still figuring it out yourself. Because silence is where these things survive. And stories, no matter how difficult, are where healing begins.